All right, so welcome back, all of you. One thing that we're doing today is using Activepresenter because obviously we're living and teaching in a different environment, and often our kids are away, and it's nice to have a lesson that they can access online. So we have colleagues away today. Mr. Fiedland can be with us. Sandra's going to be late, so they can go back and they can watch this, and I'm going to test them on it. So we better. But what type of test? That's up for discussion today.
Written.
So we had an email from Chris first thing this morning, and some of it overlaps with what we're talking about. So he talked about the 3 pillars of effective differentiation and philosophy, principles, and practices. So that does fit into a lot of where we're headed. First thing we need to do is quickly review assessment. And this is going to be quick because my goal is to spend 90 minutes with you and no more. Not because I don't like you guys, but because we have busy days. So first thing we have to consider is the assessment portion. And why do we assess? And one of the main reasons we assess is to give feedback. So we need to give feedback. Feedback needs to be timely. This quarter, it's difficult because everything's processing at double speed, right? But the students still need to get timely feedback. Audrey Looker used to talk about short cycle assessment and long cycle assessment. So for example, this week, my 10-1s, we just finished a long cycle. We finished our mid-quarter. That means we're at the halfway point of the course. And same with my 9s. We did our midterms. So that was a bigger exam, right? So we need to think about the difference between summative and formative assessment and why the kids need both. Having said that, one of the things we need to be also aware of is over-assessment. That kids need to sometimes be able to be engaged in that learning process and not overly concerned about how it's going to affect them mathematically with their score. So they shouldn't come into the room feeling like I'm always being evaluated. It's like as a teacher, if you're always being evaluated, that might create an environment where you're uncomfortable. So there is some playing around with how much assessment is ideal. We need to see their grade book moving about once a week. We need to have some kind of assessment where they can see more formal feedback, but at the same time, it's nice for them to get feedback daily. How am I doing? So what's the purpose of assessment? One of the first things we look at is, what are we teaching? Because the first question with assessment is, do they get what they're supposed to get? Do they understand what they're supposed to know? And in order to answer that, the first question we have to answer is, what do they need to know? So everything in this department comes back to our big rocks. So as a department, we've discussed the big rocks in grade 9, grade 10, grade 11, and grade 12, and we've talked about them at the different levels. So what should a KME 9 student be expected to know as opposed to a mainstream 9? What does 10-1 or 10-2 or 10-4 need to know? So one of the things I always urge you to do when you're planning a unit or you're planning just a lesson is to go back to the big rocks and say, am I focused on these big rocks? If I'm not focused on the big rocks, where's my focus? Why am I focused on that? So that's definitely an important first step, is to say, what am I teaching? And is it one of those big rocks that we've identified? And once you identify it and say, yeah, no, this is a big rock that I have to work with. So with my 10-1s yesterday, we had an essay, and the essay was about imperialism, and imperialism is one of the big rocks of the historic globalization unit. So it's one of the ones that we've identified that we have to assess. But when I assess it at the end of the unit, it shouldn't be a surprise to me or to them what I'm assessing. So that long-term assessment should be a consequence of shorter steps towards it. We need to, when you read the IPPs, there's often the suggestion that the kid needs to have the material chunked. All kids need the material chunked. So when you write it into an IPP, we'll chunk the material, that should be an easy accommodation, because we should be doing that to everyone. Kids need to see how things line up. A goes to B to C to D. There's nothing more confusing than watching a movie and being like, who's this character that just walked in? What's going on here? I thought they were married. Like, what's he doing here? you know, what's up with that guy that floats right now? You know, if you get lost in a movie, you end up disengaging from the movie. If you get lost in class, the same thing happens. So we need to make sure that we are chunking and that we are showing the sequencing, right? And that's what the big rocks do for us. So the first step is to always go back to what are we meant to be teaching? Because in those curriculums, there's a lot. So I'm teaching grade 9 for the first time in 3 years, and you can get lost in that curriculum. There's more curriculum in 9 than there is in 10 or 11. Well, maybe not 11, but definitely more in 9 than 10. But you have to look through it and say, well, what's the big rocks here? Otherwise, I could be still stuck in chapter 1 or 2. But we're moving on to chapter 6 on Tuesday. So again, first step is always big rocks, especially in a quarter like this when we know we're not going to get 100% attendance. So there's going to be gaps. So if we don't identify the big rocks and we're kind of meandering around the curriculum, when kids are coming and going, it's likely that they're going to get lost. Now, speaking of the gaps, when we met in June and we did some gap plans, we talked about, you know, what can we expect after 7 months of not being in the class? And I'm sure that you will acknowledge many of the things we talked about we're seeing. So even with my amazing grade 10s and my somewhat amazing grade 9s, I'm seeing huge gaps. And some of it is the behavior stuff that Kara mentioned that she was concerned about. But other of it is skill-wise. You know, some of it's writing, some of it's reading. And therefore, another part of that assessment is, you know, why are we assessing? We're assessing to help identify and to try to overcome those gaps. So that's why assessment in this quarter has been a struggle for teachers, because we are needing to be creative, need to respond to things in the classroom that it took some time to get to know our kids before we can identify, well, what do they need? So that's an important point to make too, is that assessment is to give them feedback, but it's also that once we understand our kids, it's to help direct them through the curriculum and overcome some of those gaps that they have. Now, in 10.1, we have 2 writing assignments. And in the -2 stream, we have 3 writing assignments. And when we talked about the gaps, one of the biggest gaps that we said that we would find is in reading and writing, is in interpretation, is in some of that analytical, synthetic thinking, some of that critical analytical thinking. And that's why as a department we decided, you know, let's focus on those writing assignments. And good news, those writing assignments are also our focus in our PLC. Having said that, I don't know about you, but I'm at the point I'm done talking about the writing assignments. You know, we need to move on. We're like a train that is stuck in the station. And we keep repeating, like, this is where we're gonna go. Now we need to go there. Now we need to go there or build a new train. So guaranteed next year we're not talking about 10-22. We've been talking about them for 5 years. We need to give some love to others. I would say that the next goal that we should be looking at is our completion rate in 31 by looking at how many kids are taking 31 as opposed to 32. Even though it's always been that Wetaskiwin Composite High School, due to our demographics, has lower numbers than the province, we, along with the province, have seen a shift from 50% down to 30%, and we're getting to the point now where we're really offering one section of 31 or 2 smaller sections. And that's a concern, because we have, you know, probably anywhere from 2 to 4 teachers in our department that would love to teach 31, but if we have one section a year, that's a big gap between when you get to teach it. So I think moving forward, the next PLC focus that we should be looking at is why are some of our students dropping from -1 to -2? And there's some easy answers there too, but there's some kids that I think we can retain more. So going back to our focus now, you may remember that we're looking at our 32 results, which are always amazing, above provincial average. Now I'm going to sound like Trump. You know, these are the best, they're huge, but we do great job at the 32 level, but we have some students, and this is from a conversation that started with Sean, we have some students that get stuck before 32. They get stuck in the rigor of 22, or they get stuck in the rigor of 10-2. And there's a few reasons why they get stuck. One of the reasons might be focused on the will part. So I have a grade 9 class where I haven't met some of my students yet. And I can see how if they transition to 10-2 from 9, that there will be students that will have missed some fundamental building blocks of how to be a student. And that'll translate to them struggling in 10-2 and 22 when they get there. So early on in this process, we talked about the students that we can help and those students that we won't be able to help as much. So one of the ugly elephants in the room is attendance. And we said, well, as classroom teachers, we can encourage attendance, we can make those home contacts, but we cannot use attendance as an excuse why marks are low. So some marks will be low because of attendance. And I always say, you cannot teach an empty desk. At the same time, we need to address those who are attending and how we can improve their mark. So I have some grade 9s that I haven't seen, and they have low marks, obviously a 0, but I have some grade 9s that I do see every day, and I need to do more for them. I need to differentiate, and I need to get them through the curriculum, and at the same time get them to address some of the gaps. So going back to the 10-2, 22 PLC that we have, we started adapting. So early on in this process, we looked at the 10-2s, and I sat in on classes with Dean, I sat in on classes with Ben, I co-taught classes with both of them, I co-taught some classes with Eric, and we looked at the writing process, and soon we realized, well, these kids are going from grade 9 where they write nothing to grade 10 where we're trying to introduce them to 3 new writing pieces. And we decided that's too much. So we decided in 10-2, we're going to focus on which writing assignments. Help me out, because I have a 10-2 quarter 4 and I need to get ready for it. So just 1 and 2. And you could make the argument that 2 is the most difficult, right? But 1 should be the most straightforward. So what we've done as a department is we've created some reviews of best practices. What seems to be working. And in an ideal world, and it's not ideal, but in an ideal world where our schedules are less complicated, we could have teacher observation. Remember when we talked about that? How everybody was going to watch somebody by the end of the semester, and ideally it would be, you know what? I'd like to go watch Cheryl teach how she's teaching the assignment 1, A1, with her 32s. Now, because I've wandered around so much, I've actually seen her do that, but I'd like to see you guys get a chance to do that, because we can only move the bar so much here. We can only get that train going so far by saying, here's the handout I give my kids, or these are the strategies I tell my kids to do, these are our best practices. Next step is to actually see those best practices being unfolded in the classroom. So, having said that, when you have a lesson where you're going to be focused on strategies for these writing assignments, maybe just send out an all-out message to the group and say, on Tuesday during the AM or PM class, I'm going to be talking about strategies for this assignment, and therefore if somebody does have a very rare prep, or if they can arrange some kind of coverage for the class, then maybe they can become a fly, not on the head, but on the wall, and watch you deliver that message. Because good news is that once we get to the diploma, we do really have phenomenal results. So amazing things are happening, and those results are reflective of the entire department. But there are moments where we seem to be hitting a barrier that we need to help the kids fly through. Yes?
If there's a half a class or something that you know in advance that you
I knew you were going to say it.
I can cover it.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that. So we have coverage in the building. So this is something that we need to do.
Yeah, because prep time is...
Prep time is...
Nobody has any.
But so if it's like the first half of class that you want to go see Melissa, then let me know in advance and I can come in and teach your class while you go see Melissa.
Absolutely. And come February, I'm going to have prep time. So I don't have a prep until February, but when it's February, it's going to be like I'm not even here. So come February, I'm going to have some prep time, unless the timetable changes again, and it probably will. But with this current timetable, it looks like in February, I could be the guy who comes in and covers your class. And maybe I come in and cover your class and I teach a lesson that I'm excited about too, because I certainly like to talk. But yeah, I think that that's a tool that we need to get to. The next logical thing is we need to see our colleagues actually use their best teaching practices in their classroom so that we can pick up those little things. How did I, I really should not be teaching anymore. But why am I still teaching? Because I used to sneak into Cheryl's class. Or I'd sneak into Dan Rates's class and I'd watch him teach. While my class was, probably not learning a whole lot, but that's how I continued with the profession. Otherwise, it's easy to get to a point where it's kind of like being in the weight room and you're like, well, I can't bench more than this, and I'm stuck and I'm frustrated with the plateau, and I don't know what to do with this kid. And this is where I'm at now with my nines. It's been so long that I'm daily conversations with people about what do you do with this scenario, because there's things with nines you don't see in high school. Yes?
I had Karen in my class virtually. She made some lovely recordings on how to go through the two writing assignments in 20-1, so that's
Yeah.
how I started the lesson.
Yeah, here it is.
So, yeah.
Let's listen to
So she's
Kara.
God.
Let's listen to Kara. Yeah, and that's another great point, is that things can happen through technology now. I'm recording all of my lessons. So I'm sure all of you follow me on YouTube, because I have 11 followers, and I'm assuming half of them are you. And I'm pushing everything out. So definitely, I think that's a logical next step. A logical next step, too, is with the handouts that we have. We've created some amazing handouts for each assignment. We have to make sure that those handouts are in each person's hands. So when I created the agenda for today, I left some room there for you guys to add some handouts. This is where some links can go. I don't see a lot of links that have been added there because, you guys are busy, but you each have editing rights to the document. We can just put those links there. So if somebody's introducing assignment 1 in the -2 stream and they're like, what should I actually get the kids to do? Because I have some grade 10s that are beautiful writers, but they don't know what to write about. They're telling me a story. So every student just needs to see a formula. What do we need to do? And I think in 10-2, with assignment 1 and assignment 2, those are very chunkable assignments. So with my 10-1s, doing A1, which is like A2, somewhat like A2 in the -2 stream, we started with one source. And we did that for 3 weeks. And we did a source a day. So we got through each type of source. We went through several cartoons. Talked about all the different things in cartoons. Talked about metaphors and irony and symbolism and personification and illusion and allegories and all of this stuff that really sounds like English language arts. And then once they were like, we get cartoons. Guess what? On the multiple choice test, they did well on the cartoons. But then we said, now we need to look at quotes. And we went through all these different types of quotes, looking for ideological perspectives, looking for problems and solutions and values and assumptions and biases. And guess what? When we get to the multiple choice test, it's the same skill that they need for those sources. So even though we're focused a lot on the writing, the skills we're getting is also going to be helpful for the multiple choice. We just don't have 1,000 questions in a test bank for multiple choice. So this is a little more teacher-friendly way to develop the same skills. But once you get through, here's one source, and then here's sources of each type, then I said, here's 2 sources about the slave trade. And can you see how they're about the same theme, same topic, same context? But is there something we can compare and contrast their ideological perspectives? Do they have different assumptions, different values? Is one a reaction to the other? And as we're doing that, that's how I taught the slave trade. So I built the A1 in 10-1, which is A2 in 10-2, into my lesson. I designed my lesson around the assessment, because the assessment was the way I can measure, do I know that they know what they're meant to know? If I'm not designing my lesson around my assessment, if my assessment is just an add-on, then it's logical that there's going to be a disconnect. So as I'm organizing what I'm doing, I make sure that it's fitting into a process. Here's one source, and then here's 2 sources, and then we're going to get to a point after we've done enough of 2, let's talk about 3 sources. Baby steps. And I do the baby steps in 10, 20, and 30. Because each year I just assume that they've forgotten. And they do. They forget. Some of the kids, it'll be almost 2 years between taking courses. But once they see the formula, kids want kids want some kind of structure. You know, you can even see that with, goals and Canadian kids, that they want a routine. They want something predictable. Because a lot of kids live in an unpredictable world where they don't know what environment they're going to sleep in that night. So if you can give them something predictable about the assessment, then they may be able to see how they can grow. And I think that our 5 writing assignments allow us to give them a predictable chunked pattern of success that we've outlined. So what's the next step that they do? And then what's the next step? And sometimes we'll get to a point where it's like, oh man, let's do this as a group, as a take home, and it's like, wow, that's the best that we've ever seen. And then you do another step and it's like, no, we move back a little bit. So it's not always going to be progress in one direction. We're going to see some regression at times as the difficulty changes, as maybe you guide it less. But definitely there is a process in place. So, having said that, by the time that they're done 22, they should be exposed to all 3 writing assignments. Are we at all confused by what we're expecting on the first writing assignment in Dash 2? So what does it look like? So if I'm a new student that is coming from a school, again, my summer school kids, these are 30 level courses this year that my kids hadn't seen some of the writing assignments. They're writing a diploma. So I actually had students in grade 12 that didn't know what an A1 looked like. But let's say that we have a new student coming in and they have to write an exam, and it's an assignment 1 in the Dash 2 stream. What does it look like? Because that's what kids always want to know. How many words, how many pages, what do I write and when do I write it? We want to make sure that there's a document that we have that says this is what your introduction looks like. This is what you need for sentence 1. This is what you need for sentence 2. Wilson Cross is a beautiful writer, and I'm not sure he gets it from Rob or not, because Rob doesn't write me that much, and when he does, it's pretty short little text messages. But Wilson's a great writer because, he's listening to those steps. And, first sentence in A1, a subject of much controversy is, and he talks about the theme of that source. Where did he pick up that step? In class. But not all kids are Wilson Cross that can just listen and get it. So we have to intervene on behalf of those who cannot actively just copy it down verbatim, those steps. And that's why we have those documents. But let's make sure we're exchanging our documents that have the process. So what's the process for A1? What would you tell the kids to put into the intro?
Talk about the big rock, the big idea of the question.
So the big rock, big idea. So A1, again, everybody knows what it looks like, but it's a list for the Dash 2s. It's a list of words, 10 words, 5 are correct, 5 are incorrect, and there's some kind of question. So at the 30 level, it could be like, which are the most effective techniques of dictatorship? And 5 will be techniques of dictatorship, and 5 would be techniques you'd see in a democracy, like, free media, right? So there's wrong answers, and I love that about A1. Kids can get it wrong. They can write 3 pages and get it wrong. But it's also an open dictionary assignment. I don't know where my dictionaries are, because we can't open up books anyway. So kids shouldn't get it wrong at a language level.
That's what I tell them to do. If it's one of the most important characteristics of a dictatorship,
Yeah.
define the term. A dictatorship is.
Yeah. So jump right in. Define the big picture, right? And this is straight out of university too, right? Start with the broad, work to the general, big picture, this is what it's about. Yes?
Should we be encouraging them, so like Melissa and I are going to have a unit test here soon, should we encourage them to bring in their own dictionaries, and are they allowed to use words?
Sure.
They won't have
There's
to.
dictionaries
Built
built into Google as well,
Okay.
and the one in Google Docs they can use.
They can use
Yeah,
that one,
they
have
have,
access
like
to that.
allowed, it's
Yeah.
accessible. Yeah, it's accessible, even in exam mode. They just have to highlight the word and then 2-finger click on it and click define in the dictionary pop up on the side.
If you're worried about the skill of them actually using a physical book, because that's what they have to do in the diploma, we do have, the diploma dictionaries up in our humanities office that are stored there. And
Just, yeah.
as long as you can get them,
And the touching of them, right?
but they're the only ones that are going to be touching them, because there should be enough for each one of your kids, and then they can go back into a box and not be touched for another
Yeah.
month. So
They're only used for unit exams.
any touching is going to be
Just them.
minimal.
Like the library's holding books, like our library's holding books for I think 2 days before we're
Yeah.
shopping. So it's not like it needs to be an extended period of time between.
As long as you don't have AM, PM class using the same book,
Because when they're writing, like their final, will they have access to the dictionary thing?
Well, the writing part of the finals in class, like it's in the classroom, so,
But
I mean,
even like.
you could bring
someone who gets
pizza
a
and I wouldn't know
diploma,
what.
do they
Yeah,
have-
yeah.
They have a physical dictionary.
Okay.
They won't have the one in the
Okay.
computer.
So
That-
they
that's
have to
what-
know how to use a physical.
That's why I think it's a skill that they should be picking up.
Okay.
But like, I don't, my kids just use it on their computer,
Do they?
because I find that if it creates a dependency and a habit of looking at words,
Yeah.
they will look them up on the diploma, so you don't always have to have like a physical dictionary.
But some don't know how to use a dictionary.
Yeah, but they get used to the, like, I have to look this up, so you don't always have to have it, as long as they know that they should, and I tell the kids, like, this is, if you wanna call it cheating, like, there's almost no way to get this wrong unless you truly don't understand the concept, which a couple kids don't, like, they really don't, they misunderstand, or they don't know the concept enough that when they see the dictionary definition, they don't know which one to pick,
Yeah,
and
so-
they're
so
picking the
now what
one
do they
that
do?
doesn't make sense, right? Because, you'll get kids like that too, that'll write that, but you don't always have to have a physical dictionary if you don't have access or it's not convenient either.
Just maybe have like one day where they can have, like one test where they can learn how to
Sure,
use the
yeah.
dictionary and just be done with it.
Or pick A1 to use it.
Or some kids might always want to have them, right? Back to that first paragraph, the big theme. This is the theme of the set of the words, I guess, not set of sources. And then how do you work down towards the end of that paragraph? What else is in that first paragraph? Sure.
I just wrote out my steps. I was
Yeah.
having to define the term. Liberalism is a political system based on yada yada.
Yep.
Context. The term has its origin in the Enlightenment. Give me a little bit of a historical
Yep.
background. Examples. Some present-day examples are
Mm-hmm.
supporters. Locke and Rousseau would support. Like I have them do all of that before they get into the.
And I'm going to get you stopped there because everything you're saying it can be stuff that they have canned going in. Meaning that the kids should know what possible themes are. They shouldn't be sitting there the day of the test and, oh crap, I didn't think I'd see nationalism today, right? So these are possible things that you might talk about, leading up to the exam. These are themes that could be on our A1 tomorrow or A1 next week. And during that unit, I would be talking about them constantly so that they already have that canned and it's and it's easy to mark that paragraph because everybody's done an excellent job. And you get the halo effect because if that first paragraph's good, I bet the markers already kind of made up their mind with regards to what kind of mark they're going to get. Sure.
Right up until the diploma, I still tell my kids what the A1 is gonna be. Like, I'll write it up on the board. We got an A1 next week on dictatorship.
Yeah.
We got classical liberalism, whatever it is.
I give
Because
it to them too.
the diploma, and I guess it probably should be this way for 10 and 11, only has 7 topics.
Yeah, it's very critical.
They might use synonyms, so instead of dictatorship, it's a totalitarian
Or capitalism,
government or
it's free market.
authoritarian or
Yep.
whatever. But so we also talk about synonyms. But I tell my kids, theoretically, you can prep every single one,
Mhm.
which terms you're going to pick, who applies to each one before the diploma, so that when they're memorizing, it's a memorization test to see how much they could remember from the class.
And that
So-
brings comfort, and with comfort comes probably greater productivity, right?
Yeah, so when they get that one on the diploma, they should recognize it because they've either seen it in class or they've written it in class, because maybe they've seen it as an exemplar. Like, I don't do
Absolutely.
collectivism as one of my essays, but I show 2 of them as my intro. So they've seen every single topic by the end of the course,
Mhm.
whether we've written them or not. So it's a good, like you said, it's an easy prep. Like, kids could pre-write it as a practice. And I've done that for
100%.
10-2
In
last year. I
quarter
had kids
4, when I
pre-write
write
what they were gonna
10-2s,
say.
we're going to be doing on our A1 test, we're going to be doing an A1 that we've been doing the entire, unit together. So you're going to be like, oh, okay, yeah, I remember what we said about this. This is what imperialism is. And this is how it connects to globalization. And this is why some people think imperialism is good or bad. But these are the reasons for imperialism. Gold, God, and glory, right? And this is not a reason for it. Hard to pick one that's not. Like, I guess humanitarianism, some could say is, but it's usually not controlling another country because it's in their best interest, unless you're Rudyard Kipling. So, how many of those words would you pick, Cheryl? Do you tell them 3?
Oh, yeah, I say, I always tell them to pick out all of the correct characteristics.
Yeah.
So that you're showing the marker that you know
You
which
know
ones
all
are correct,
five.
but choose at least 3, I always say.
Yeah.
You gotta have 3.
There you go.
Yeah.
So on the writing on the diploma, it doesn't say pick 3, but after extensive marking, this is why, Chris, we have to go to marking. This is why you need to send us, is so that we can see what is being expected. Because when you go up there, it doesn't say it on the page, but when you go up there, there's a lot of markers that will say, well, yes, they went into great depth about 1, but I'm still seeing an S here because they only talked about 1. They don't see all the nuances of the techniques of dictatorship. So let's get them in the practice of doing 3. Now, again, chunking it, I would probably teach them the intro. Make sure they get the intro. Then I might change it and say, let's do an intro for something different. And once I'm like, okay, now we have the intro down, let's see if we can pick 1 word and do 1 word together. Let's get me, and when I went into Dean's class, when I went into Eric's class, when I went into Ben's class, I sat at the desk and I typed it. And I had them tell me what to type. And then sometimes I type it, and then suddenly it's just Dean and I talking, and we're using words, and the kids are like, what's going on? But they need to see organically, they need to see the experience. They need to see you writing it. So an exemplar is great, but even better than exemplar is for them to be a part of the process. Take them through the process, write that paragraph together. We have the technology in place. Show them that, you know what? And they love it when I'm writing it and I make typos. They're like, oh, you can't spell shit. It's like, yeah, I know I can't. That's why we get to go back and edit. Here's how you edit, because you guys don't know how to edit, right? So it's comforting, it's relationship building, it shows them that you're in it together, and I think early on you need to do this. Yes?
Okay, so we did this, and they color-coded their paragraphs and whatnot. Are they allowed to take that in with them, say for a unit exam as an exemplar, even if they're doing, like, say the A1 for the unit exam is different than what we did
Like it's a
together?
different topic, but you're going to get them to bring in this exemplar in 10-2.
Yeah, because it's all, no,
Right.
this is 20-2.
I'm still okay with it in the beginning of 22. No, by the end, they can't bring something in.
Yeah.
But as a classroom teacher, what you're doing is you're differentiating, right? You're accommodating. You're saying this is the needs of this group. So some groups need 8 essays, some groups need 1, some groups need that guidance, some groups don't. So I think as a professional, you're not going to be micromanaged and say that you have to, you don't have to do it. But I think that's a logical differentiation. No, it's your classroom. And
You're still testing them on the content and the skill, it's just recognizing that maybe they're not quite there yet with that skill, and that example that they bring in that they've written or that you've written as a class, they can go back to it to say, okay, I missed this step.
this is where Dean Phelan has his hands up. And he said, well, I had the steps on the board, and we still had some kids sitting next to the board, and they still didn't do the steps. So I totally get that too, Dean. So thanks for being here, buddy. It is good to have the steps, but at the same time, expect that they're still gonna struggle.
And are they
But it's gonna help them.
have their writing guide?
I let them bring in their writing guide, it doesn't give them any content.
Again, why not do that early on, and then begin to take some crutches away by the end, and just see if they can get past that writing guide. And I would reintroduce it every year, because every year there's been a gap, right? So I think it's logical it's just like a new season. You're gonna have to go through some of the training again. So sports metaphors are always the worst. Karen?
I was gonna say, Cheryl and I still have give them guides. I let them have an exemplar beside them on the first one, because you also have to remember that not every kid you get in 22 was intended. So if you have 10-1 kids in there, they've never seen that assignment.
Absolutely.
So I have a bunch of, now we have some, in 32, we have some 21 kids that are coming in that need that, like, you can teach the essay, but it's very different from what they've ever done. So it's helpful for them to see the language, the structure, because I had a kid who I gave them the template, because on our second A1, they had just the template. I took away the exemplar now because it's 30. And they were like, I don't know if I'm supposed to do an intro. And I said, well, you can see here I wrote paragraph 1 intro and then the steps. Yeah, but it doesn't tell me how many paragraphs. Well, here's paragraph 1, there's headings, and they still are struggling because they've they haven't really been with it the entire time. But so those exemplars, at least at the beginning, are really nice for those kids to look at somebody who got 100 and go, okay,
I can model, because I even tell the kids, count how many sentences. You have one sentence or two sentences in a paragraph. Do you see how they have 4 or 5? You should probably say more, so they can kind of compare, because sometimes when they do all the steps, they think they've done all the steps, but if they compare theirs to a good one, then they can know, oh, you know what, I actually said more than this person. So then they feel comfortable and they know they've done a good job. So even in 30, we give them resources to use during the exams, or the written exams.
And they won't all bring them in. Maybe 1/3 of the class will bring them in and the rest will wing it anyway, but.
Or they keep it closed and they don't look at it.
Just to piggyback on what you're saying about exemplars, so I also think that an exemplar before is great, but an exemplar after is great as well. So some of these kids need to, after it, say, you know what, everybody just wrote the same essay. This is the exemplar essay from your class. And you can even look at the rubric and say, let's mark it together and say, you know, why is it insightful whereas yours is straightforward? And what's different? You're talking about the same case studies. A lot of kids are like, well, I talked about the slave trade, but let's see how this one's different. And I think that the more exposure to that, then it can elevate the writing too. So I had some students that had no idea what to do with our first 10-1, A1. And then I said, you know what, here's an exemplar, exact same thing. And they're like, oh. So then they go from like a 40 up to a 56. They're not going to go from a 40 to 100, but they're making their way there. And I think that that's an important step too. So I think we're done with A1. Then in 10.2, A2. So much like in 10.1 with A1, it can't be something that just suddenly one day they get an A2 and they're like, wow, I've never seen sources before. You know, what are we doing here? So A2 is a source-based assignment, and there's some sources that they're never going to use, right? They don't have quotes, although I think that it's good practice in quote dissection anyways, because that's a skill they need for their multiple choice. But I think that if we can weave some into the curriculum, maybe not every day, but almost every day. Kate used to do this with her 9s. She'd have a source a day, and her 9s didn't love it, but they certainly became better at writing because of it. So I think that we can do more exposure to it along the way, and there's those predictable questions in the A2. So in 30, it's always the role of government or role of individual. And one of the problems that we had in the last 5 years, Tanya, was we were like, well, what question do we use for the 10s and 11s? Because that's where our confusion in A2 was. Kids were getting kind of caught up on the question. They could do maybe the first part of the assignment on the A2, but not the second. So where did we land on that?
We connected them to the key course concepts.
Yeah?
I still think you could almost tie everything you teach in both of those courses to individual and government.
So being that we're talking about nationalism, how should an individual respond to this national problem?
Yeah, I think if you look at it, you can do it.
And government is national interest collectively rather than individually.
I did that for my 10-2s last year,
Yeah.
the one that we got to do before we went off.
Right.
And I thought it was quite simple, because I find like I think one of the reasons that kids do well on the A2 in 30 is because the topic is incredibly simple. So it's accessible, it's not wordy, it's, you know, what is the role of government, or what is the role of the individual? It's very straightforward.
And let's go back to that, they can have a can't. Because although the sources are there as inspiration, they can answer that question, they can have like an answer to that question prepared. So that there's some stuff that they know they want to talk about, what the role of individual or government. So the whole course is about two things, role of individual and role of government. So as you're teaching every day, you're talking about, hey, this is how it fits into the role of individual, or this is how it fits in the role of government. In your notes, put a big G by this, or a big I, so that when you're studying the role of individual and role of government, these are the sections to go back to. So we can direct them during our lessons, but we can also simplify our language on the assessment.
And I think that's part of it, is that the topic, whatever it is, if they choose to do globalization or nationalism or whatever, or we do role of the individual government, it just has to be really simple. Like, just like not wordy, no to what extent, no nothing fancy, just, you know, what is the role? Keep it very simple for them, because then I find that they'll be more successful at answering the question.
So I think that most of us became social studies teachers because of the content of 20. 20's the golden class, right? 20's history, 20 you get to talk about the French Revolution, World War I, World War II, get to talk about Stalin and Hitler and all those great things. So there's a lot there to pick from, right? And to some extent, 20 could be the harder course. And there's a reason why the diploma is in 30 and not 20, because they were worried that if we created a diploma around the 20 level course, that it was going to become very, really testing the minutia, right, of the curriculum. Those little points, those little hidden corners, and I want to worry that we don't begin to do that. We want to make sure that we're testing kind of like, especially in the A2, the big things, the big pictures. So what are some of the big picture things we could be testing in A2 and 22 then? So what are some of those things? Like the role of government or role of individual given what? So what could be, with the French Revolution, it could be, what should be the role of government or role of individual when there's food shortage, or when there's inequality? Facing political, social, economic inequality, what should be the role of government? And you could have three sources. One could be political inequality, one could be social, one could be economic. So when I'm talking about the French Revolution, I'm talking about the causes of the revolution, I'm talking about the consequences. I'm not spending 2 weeks on, hey, this is what happened on July 14th, 1789. I'm talking more about what drives history rather than the history itself. And when we're talking about the causes, we're going to focus on economic, political, and social causes. And then when they get to the A2, and it's like, oh, here's one that looks at a bread shortage, or unequal taxation, or the idea of we have a government where 1/3 of the people, or 97% of the people, have 1/3 of the input into a parliament that they don't have to listen to. So you can talk about the need for political reform. And what should the government do in response to some of this inequality? And maybe their answer is the government needed to be more authoritarian, given once they unleashed the power of the masses, how chaotic it became. And that's a viable response. But we're giving them a question that links up to what we've taught, and that I think is general enough, right? So then you look at the 19th century, and you can look at what's the big theme of the 19th century. Well, we have reform in 30, we have reform in 48, we have the building of Germany and Italy, but you really have the cause of World War I, right? So, and you have the idea of going to war. So you can even look at the concept of being at war. What is the responsibility of the individual? So then you can look at people at the home front, rationing, or maybe candidate savings bonds, or you have enlisting, you have conscription, these issues. What should be the role of the individual when your nation's at war?
Yeah, role of government too.
Or role of government. What should the government be doing? Should they be conscripting? Should they be rationing? Should they be, creating propaganda that demonizes and dehumanizes the enemy? Lots of great stuff. Like 20
You've
is.
got it twisted you've got to change the whole way you teach.
Yeah, and you really have to have the exam in place before you begin the unit, and then say during the unit I'm going to breadcrumb my way to it. Because if you're teaching some stuff and then at the end you're like, oh, they took off the mask and it's Shaggy's the bad guy, you feel cheated, right? If at the end of the Scooby-Doo episode Shaggy's the bad guy, you're like, this is bullshit. I don't want to watch another episode. But if you're taking it off and you're like, ooh, I knew it, you turn around and you tell everybody, I totally knew it. It was the Black Knight was like whoever the Black Knight is. Then the assessment is more, it's fair, right? Yeah.
I was gonna say, I think it's also important, I find like with 30s, that the students don't always get the less desired viewpoint. So for example, the other day, we were doing environment in 30 and we watched ones about like there's the oil bucket that eats the earth, and kids are like, oh, okay, oil's bad for the earth. Then we had the one where Al Gore is blowing up the world with his Kyoto whatever, and the kids couldn't get it because it's the kind of anti-environmentalist, like the opposite side. So I think it's important with our sources that they're not all like pro what is kind of the norm of belief, because kids have a hard time going, this is an anti-environmental one, and you do get in trouble for that because then some people think social studies teachers just push a very left-wing agenda, right? And I find it's really nice that the kids don't see enough of what we would consider to be more either right-wing or more, you know, like you said, in favor of a more authoritarian government. Like, they don't see that type of source, I think, enough. So I think it's important that we make sure we're not just throwing a bunch of why the revolution caused violence and what the causes of the revolution, but maybe have some of those, you know, I don't know if you could find some sources that are more pro-authoritarian or pro, you
Like
know.
the Edmund Burke, like the pro.
Yeah, pro-monarch,
anti-change.
pro, yeah. Even having Hobbes in there with the, like, this is why, you know, revolution's bad, because look at all the death, those types of things. Because I find that kids have a harder time with ones that are not mainstream belief. If that makes sense.
Because they expect that, oh, of course, we're talking about the French Revolution, this is what I assume, that it's going to be you know, promoting, you know, freedom or liberty, but in fact is saying that liberty equals chaos. Like you said, Burke was outspoken against it. So, no, those are good points. What I like to do from a delivery standpoint is, you know, I have my online texts, right? So the textbooks in 30 is okay. In 20, I can't use the 20-1 textbook because I don't like the way it's organized. And 10, there's parts of it that are okay. But I have my online textbook divided into lessons, and in those lessons I have cartoons, I have quotes. And that's where I can just go and pull these cartoons and quotes from. So by the time we get to an exam, I can be like, guess what? That cartoon was in lesson 5. Or if we're watching a video, sometimes there'll be a great cartoon in the video, then you can pause the video, use your snipping feature, and just pull that cartoon straight out of the video. And if we're watching a video and I do that in front of them, then they're like, holy crap, we better remember what this cartoon looks like. Because he's going to use it on the multiple choice or on maybe the A2. So I think that as a social studies teacher, we're always collecting sources. There's always something. We're always item building. Especially in -1 where they want more and more assessment. We're always item building. And it's very laborious. But it's good to have like an inventory. Because as Ben pointed out, I'm not well organized. He's like, I can come in here and look on the P drive all weekend and not find what I'm looking for. So one of the things I have had to do to become more Ben, it's kind of like being Zen but being Ben, is you know, compartmentalize my stuff into this is lesson 3 in 20-2, and therefore if I'm ever looking for a cartoon on that thing, I know where to look. And then now that we have so many kids working from home, I just share these things with them. And 95% of them don't look at it. But then that becomes a them thing. I've done my job. It becomes a will thing. So, yeah. Let's move to A3. So we don't do A3s, assignment 3 and 10-2, but there is a formula for A3, even though the province sometimes struggles with A3. And I think A3 is a neat assignment because this is where all those controversial issues that you bring up in class become relevant. So when something's happening in society and you're like, hey man, I really want to talk about this current event, how do you weave it in? I would always weave it in under the umbrella of, let's talk about this, but let's see if we can see 3 perspectives on it, and you're kind of like building an A3 with them. So pick a controversial topic, like, I don't know, your federal government spending hundreds of billions of dollars on you know, relief during the pandemic, and then you can see, okay, what are 3 perspectives here? Or you're going to have some people that say what Trudeau has done has been enough. You're going to have some that might say that he hasn't done enough, and you're going to have some that said that he's done too much. So what could those arguments be? Well, let's listen to some videos, let's read some articles, let's build the sources, and then, hey, now it's easy to do one, right? So I think A3 could be an easy
We're
thing
gonna
to
be able to
do.
use the mandatory immunization one again. And
Yeah.
again,
I use that.
Because I mean, that's.
I use that, and
Yeah.
and this is why I think current events are so
Yeah.
important in class for the -2 level, is because so many kids, when we did should the flu vaccine be mandatory, the kids brought it back to, a lot of kids actually said, due to the death rate, due to the spread of the transmission rates, it should be left to the individual choice. They said, however, if it becomes significant, if it's affecting significant populations such as the coronavirus, they started bringing into, we should consider mandatory vaccines for situations that are, you know, and they are able to pull stuff in from, and lots of stuff, right? Like even with, what was the one I just did? Oh, minimum standard of living. a lot of kids pulled in serve,
and stuff.
and they talked about how the downside, because again, kids need to know the downsides of all these things that we might think are important, is that they talked about the problem and the fear is that people will take advantage. Like in serve, there's been a lot of media, coverage on people who now have to pay it back because they inappropriately applied for it or they were taking advantage, and that is the fear. So when they hear all this stuff in the news, like the other day we had a debate in class about the carbon tax, and I said that would be a great one. Who can give me besides F. Trudeau as a reason for why we should not have a carbon tax? I said, because you guys need to know both sides. And the kids were really good about coming up with intelligent arguments because, like you said, when they get the current event every day, they need to be able to see the pros and cons of it, even though, we still might sway to one side or another. But a lot of kids, like we see on the diploma, a lot of kids know nothing about the world. Like they have never heard the news once in their life, so then they say really strange, really like incorrect things, and we're flat out told sometimes if they're an anti-vaxxer, if they say it causes autism, it's wrong. You don't. It's incorrect. It's so
That's a round thing.
they're very clear that if the kid is uneducated
They
about
can
the
be
topic.
anti-vax, but if they use illogical or arguments and
Yes.
evidence that can't be proved when are just based upon fear, then they get
Like that really
limited.
so we're you can tell the kids who have a good worldview, and I think that comes from discussion of current events all the time so that they know what's going on and they're not putting their foot in their mouth saying something that's incorrect.
I find with that one, the most difficulty they have is the first paragraph, like the importance of the issue. They can go in and do it, but it's that very first, why is this an important issue?
Right.
They have a hard time with that. You have to really prompt them with that.
So a lot of practice helps for that.
Because they don't know what's going on in Canada. Like half the kids don't know if, I remember the vaccine one, half the kids didn't know that vaccines were free. And, we saw kids going, flu vaccine should be free. It's not fair that people have to pay for it. And we're like, well,
But even
it
the
is
issue of
like,
stating that it's, freedom versus control.
Yeah.
Those big themes that we talk about every day, right?
Yeah.
So the purpose of social studies is to enable our students to become citizens in a free and democratic society, and we want them to participate. And the reason why we have assignment 3 is to encourage active participation. And we want them to be able to see, even though sometimes the government seems to not want this, but we want them to be able to see multiple opinions on the same, and really see value in multiple opinions, but ultimately be able to look at those multiple opinions and see where they see as being correct. So I think that assignment 3 is a critical assignment, not so they can do well in the diploma, but so they can be a part of society. And I think assignment 1 is a critical assignment because it allows them to try to filter what's correct and what's not correct here. And I think that in a world where what is false and what isn't false has become very clouded, I think it's an important skill that they have to decipher what's a lie here and what's not. And I think assignment 2 is a great assignment as well because our most important relationship, aside from our family and friends, is our relationship with our government. Now, how does this connect me to government? And that's assignment 2. So I think that a lot of work was being done to create, what should the writing assignments look like in Dash 1 and 2, but they didn't pick those 3 writing assignments in Dash 2 randomly. That those 3 writing assignments, they allow you to measure and develop the skills necessary for our students to become functional adults in our society. And that's why they are our cornerstones. So when you look at my grade book in 10-1 right now, everything's an A1 or an A2 builder or multiple choice. My grade 9s, yes, we're doing some other stuff, but it's because it's small stuff being scaffolded, I hate pronouncing stuff, towards some writing that they're going to be expected to do in high school. So one fear that I do have is how much assessment we're doing and why we're assessing. And what I never want to see someone doing is having to mark 4, 5, 6 hours a night every night, because then you're burnt out. And I'd rather you have very little marking and be fresh when you're here. So there's always those horror stories of teachers that are up till midnight every night marking or beyond, and then they're tired here and they're not as effective. So it is important to do less and do better. Yeah.
I've found over the years, if kids will get about the same mark anyway if you're giving them 8 assignments versus 4 assignments.
Yeah.
It doesn't change their overall grade, really.
You're right. And you know what, I really believe in fluidity. I was talking to my 10s, and some 10s had, you know, a mark, say an average of 91, and then they just got 60 on an assignment. And I'm like, you know what, good news, we're gonna do an assignment just like that later. And if you can show me later that you can do it then, I'll go back and I'll change the earlier recording of it. I think that in an ideal world, our final exam would be worth 100%, because that's the ultimate exit. And I know Chris would stand by that if your kid passes the final but fails the course, then why are they not being able to move on to the next level? So to some extent, I'll talk to kids at an individual level, and I'll be like, you know, you had an average of this before the assignment, you got this on the assignment, but here's an opportunity for us to work together towards this next opportunity to do that assignment. And then if you show me an improvement of 20%, I can go back in and I'll put that mark for both. Because what we're doing is ultimately every assignment until the end, they're check-ins, not a check-up. It's an ultimate checkup that is the true assessment of learning. That those other assessments are for learning. But everybody's mark hungry and they don't want to wait till the end of the quarter or the end of the semester to see their grade. So I'll give them grades, but it's like, you know, I'm sorry, but you're at a 60 right now, and I know you're devastated because your mark just dropped by 20% in class. But we're going to be writing a very similar essay in the future. You know, take my comments on this one, fix it, and then together we need to create an outline for the next one, show it to me, and let's see if we can get you to the next part in the rubric. Jumping up the rubric on one category, sometimes, you know, the difference between an S and a PF, you know, there's just a couple of things that they need to do better. So take it one step at a time, and I think the kids can see improvement. But I'm okay with that. Why wouldn't we be okay with that? That if a kid can show that they're getting better at something, and you're still measuring the same thing. So you could make the argument that if I had a multiple choice test on ideologies and then later one on the Industrial Revolution, if they got 20% on ideologies and 100 on the Industrial Revolution, I can't go back and change that because that's different content. But if I'm testing a skill, then of course I can go back and change those things. Any other ideas about what we're up to? So what do we need to do here today? We need to create a goal for 2021. And one of the things that Chris mentioned is that, you know, your goals for 2020, we didn't accomplish them because we didn't get to finish that year. So he suggested that we just go back and change the year. So I just went back and changed that from 2019 to 2020. I said from 2019 to 2021. So our district goal, our school goal is to see more high school completion, more success. So how can we help out with that in social studies? You know, what can we do as our part? Well, we need to get more people through social studies because social studies is a requirement of graduation. So we look at social studies, we do some of that data mining, and you know, this was it Ben's or Eric's? This was Eric's first year with us when we did the data mining, and remember we just sat around looking at all of our results, and you know, that's kind of a nice experience because our results are great. But then we look back and we say, okay, but how can we be better? We always want to improve. And one thing that we said was, you know what, let's focus on the writing assignments. And so that's how we ended up getting here. And we decided, let's go back to 22. And then after a year of 22, we said, you know what, let's go back into 10-2 as well. Because some of the problems we're seeing in 22 is because of things that are happening in 10-2. And then we started, like I mentioned earlier, we started adapting and saying, we're trying to do too much in 10-2. We're trying to do 3 writing assignments that go from 0 to 3, that's too much. So we're adapting. We're adapting on what we see, the feedback from them. And we need to continue to adapt because our kids have gone through a lot. Some of them are very uncomfortable when they are here. So we need to make sure that we spend our time with them, helping them move forward. Oh, I don't get text messages and I have 2 sitting there. That's fun. With your permission, I'm just going to submit the same goal then. So moving forward, what do we need to do? In our 10-2, 22 classes, we do need to collect data still. So last year we were collecting data. The problem with this process is if we're baselining them in the beginning, then are we baselining them on an assignment that we did with them? Because if so, then our data is gonna show the opposite of what we want. It's gonna say, wow, the first assignment, the class average was 80, and then after that we went down to 60. Well, wait a minute, the first one we wrote together, so that's why the class average is 80. So to some extent, and this might be more applicable to quarter 2 than quarter 1, because honestly, at the end of August, I didn't know we were gonna be doing these PLC groupings, because it looked like we wouldn't even be here still. But now that we're still here, and it looks like we're gonna be staying here, I think in quarter 2, we can collect these baseline data at the beginning and say, okay, within the first 2 weeks, we need to measure them on those A1s and A2s just to see where they're at. And then we can respond to where their deficiencies are, and we can give them more teaching and more coaching, and then we can coach them up to where they're at the end, and then we want to see, has there been improvement? And the reason for collecting this data is that, you know, if we're seeing improvement and we can identify this is what I did in my class, then if Russ McBride's not seeing improvement in my class, but I'm not doing something that you're doing, then it might help me add a tool. So it's like, wow, your class, Cheryl's class really improved, mine didn't, and she showed them the Kara Hetlinger video and I didn't. Maybe I should just do that. Let's see if that's the difference maker. Maybe Kara's the difference maker. Maybe that video is the end all be all. So there's a lot of conclusions we can make from the data, and we definitely need to pick up some of that. I do have a difficulty with the process. I don't like my kids writing one without my help in the beginning, but that's the whole point of a baseline, right? And an additional problem with the baseline is I begin to teach what to do on day 1 with these writing assignments. So my baseline data is going to be not 100% accurate, but at least there'll be something there. We talked about the introducing them there. For those teaching 10-1, 21, 31, I really believe that we need to be working on item development. We need to be creating more multiple choice test questions. We need to be, the essay questions are easy to create. The A1 sets are easy to create. I think we need to create more multiple choice. I think we need to have a test bank of hundreds of questions, because kids want practice and kids want feedback, and it's hard to give them feedback if your test is secure. And you're like, well, I'd love to give you feedback, but you can't see the test again, ever. It's like, well, no, they need to see it. They need to see it in their hands. They might even need, you can make the argument, they need to have a copy that they can take with them. So we need to have some anchor questions that we use, or we need to have questions that we can pick from. So this is a huge task. Item development, you know, if you go to item building and you spend a weekend, you might create 12 questions, and chances are none of them will ever get used. So I've probably created about 100, and I've seen 2 on the diploma so far. And one of them that I saw, I didn't think was a good question that I created. But oh well, yeah, I thought it was too easy. So long story short, what do the -2s need to do? All those things we talked about chunking and scaffolding and modeling and all those things. But we also need to, at the beginning of the next quarter, collect some data so that we can baseline our kids and compare them to their exit. If you have some data already from quarter 1, you can also push me those numbers like we did last year to see if we can see some change. With the -1s, we need to do item development. And I find with my 10-1s, their writing skills are, I would say, as a group, horrendous, right? That the whole point of 10-1 to me, the curriculum is so thin that it gives you an opportunity to focus on writing. That social 10-1 is as much an English course as it is a social studies course. That we spend a lot of time on writing. My goal is that when they leave 10-1, that they should be comfortable with the 2 writing assignments. Because in 21, there's so much content that that's a multiple choice heavy course. That Kara and I have hundreds of multiple choice questions in 21.
Yeah, I've attached quite a few, which is lovely, because some of them are so, well, because they're from the old
diploma exams.
old diplomas.
Yep.
So some of them are relevant, because we don't, we're no longer a fact-based course, and
Mhm.
those were kind of fact-based. So I had a question, a kid asked me, they're like, do I need to know what Pope Leo said? Because one of the questions says, what was Pope Leo's position on? And I'm like, no, you do not need to
you
know
do
that.
not.
But
You might need to know it in 10 years when they change curriculum again, but not now.
But it gets them to look things up, which is
Absolutely.
great. It gets them to be familiar with the language, which is a huge one, because I find even with 32, the kids look at the questions and some of them are like, oh, there's so much reading, and it builds that endurance, because I know like a lot of 32s, they kind of skim over the ones that look like they're at least a half a page long,
Yeah.
because they don't want to read them.
And chances are those are the easiest ones because the answer's on the page. They
Yeah.
just need to find it.
Yeah, so I find that it's just good practice, and then they test themselves on the knowledge, and if they don't understand a question, then they can come and, kids are always asking for practice, multiple choice.
So in 22, the 21 multiple choice, being that most of it's coming from 31 now down to 21, in 22 the multiple choice is going to be too difficult that we have. But sometimes you can take the same source and make an easier question.
I use some of those exact same questions, like especially around like Hitler, Stalin, dictatorship stuff
Mhm.
that we use in 21. I use that same stuff in 32,
Yeah.
and I attach those as the practice questions because over the years, 31 has developed into a higher level reading comprehension exam, whereas
So they're really easy.
those older questions are kind of they're just at
You
that
mean
range.
32 is developed into
The
a
old
harder
30
level?
No, 30, the old 30, so the 31 now is
Oh, okay, I
much
see what you're
harder.
saying.
So the old
The
31
old 31
questions
is like the new,
is
the
like
old,
32
the
questions.
old 30
The old 30.
is like the new
Thir-
30-2.
Yeah, so like the questions are much more, there's a lot less reading comprehension,
Yeah.
a lot more like of
Those-
just those straight facts-based questions. So
Absolutely.
you can use those two there.
One other thing we're seeing in grade 9, obviously there's no PAT this year. There may not be diplomas. There's a lot of teachers in Edmonton freaked out right now. What's our final exam going to be if we don't have a diploma? But that's on Edmonton Public for trying to cancel the diploma, I guess. But grade 9, we don't have a PAT. There's questions obviously online, but then there's answers online. So if you're using old PAT questions, then if your kids have studied what's online and get 100, then that's kind of on you for using material that's not secure. So Dean and I currently are scrambling a little bit creating final exams, and the problem in grade 9 is you're aware you need to have more than one copy of the final. You need to have a KE final. So another short-term thing that we're doing as a department is making a final exam in grade 9. So I put these other two things up there because I need to remind you that we're not just working on 20-2. 20-2 and 10-2, that's just one aspect where we're up to. And on these days when we lose the afternoons, because we have RTI intervention meetings, we don't really have a lot of time.
Russ,
Yeah.
if the diplomas are canceled, would you not just go with school awarded mark like for grade 12s?
Well,
Like for
a
the
lot of the schools are saying, but then they don't
Why do
have
we
like
need another one?
a test of everything. Because do you have you have unit
Well, no,
exam
I did
tests?
unit exam,
Yeah.
that's all I've ever done.
But some of the teachers in Edmonton that are part of the little discussion that we send emails back and forth, they're like, but we need some test to test the entire course.
Just
But
use an old
why?
diploma.
I don't get
Yeah.
it. You've tested them.
You've tested them
When they're
on
done
the,
my course, they're
Yeah.
ready for the diploma, they don't, I mean,
you've
I
tested them
think
on the
that-
units, they've already been tested on
Yeah,
everything,
but
they've just haven't been tested
it's
on
just-
everything together. Haven't they already been
this is,
tested
but
on,
this
yeah?
is I'm just saying, it's an extraordinary year going forward.
You could
Hopefully.
make the argument
It's
we
not
don't
gonna
need to
happen
make one.
again, this is gonna be a temporary thing, then we'll get back.
Because you'd hate to be in the position that, maybe Kara could find herself in, a week before the diploma, the school saying, hey, guess what, diplomas are canceled, but we need you to create a final. And it'd be like, well, I don't have time in a week to create a.
Coloring
I don't know
pages,
why they
it
do that.
is. If
Yeah.
you can color the lines, you pass.
But the other risk is how it would skew marks, right? So you create an exam that.
It hasn't been field tested, yeah.
That's right.
Right,
It's
and
not
then somebody
something
else
really
reads
new.
one that's completely random and finding those little
Yeah.
That's
niches
the other
that you
thing.
didn't teach, and
It's
so
not
now a
legit
kid can't
anyway.
get into university because.
Yeah. Now, in 31, I already have an in-class or an in-school final because I have an in-school field test. So I think it's probably in our best interest for each course to kind of have like a field test that you would use if Alberta Ed wasn't coming in.
I'm doing 2 field tests anyways,
Yeah.
so,
That's if they're coming in.
Are there
Well, they're
field
sending
tests?
them,
yeah,
right?
there's paper, we distribute them. They're not coming.
So Kara's just
They're-
gonna make
they're gonna mail it
photocopies
to
of
me,
them.
and I will give, I'm gonna do 2 in one day.
Yeah,
Have you requested already?
Yeah.
Okay.
so theoretically,
For November, cause I need them for, and you can't give them in November, they won't send them out, so you have to do it in October, so I asked for like October 29th, because that's the last day you can have a field test, you can't have them the week of November.
because ideally you covered the course when you're testing the entire course, but, you know, if you had to, you could take out the questions that don't work, so if you have a question
Yeah.
where only 20% get them right, because they'll throw those questions off the exam anyways, and then you could use that as your final exam.
Or, and I'm always, well, we are always very critical of some of those questions too, going, that's unfair.
Yeah.
Like, I remember I saw one and you had to know the nuances between like the different events in the 50s, and I'm like, oh my god.
And the
Like,
reality is not every field test question ends up on a diploma.
right, so some of them you would have the opportunity to
Yeah.
just axe out and treat it as a bonus if the kids got it right too, if you feel that some of the questions are unfair. So there's ways to get around it, that I could use those as the
But
final.
only if the kids knew it was gonna be used as a final, cause how, there, lots of
They,
kids
they
don't
know,
take it
they
seriously.
know it is an opportunity to replace marks. So
Right.
it's, if they don't try, it would be just as if they weren't trying, like, if this is an opportunity to boost their mark.
Right, but the
I-
kids
I
who
would think
decide
Alberta
it's
Ed would have
fair,
to-
then it's not
Yeah.
impacting their final mark, right? It's like, yeah, okay, whatever, I don't really care.
Yeah, if
Well,
we're
I don't
using
think
it as
that's
our
a
final,
problem.
we would tell them well
Yeah.
in advance, because as soon as we would know, then we would have to tell the kids. But it's up to Alberta Ed. Alberta Ed's not in the market of canceling a diploma they've already printed and everything again,
Those
right?
kids might not care on the diploma anyways, but I've never had that problem.
What they may end up doing is closing it in Edmonton, but if we have 0 cases in Wetaskiwin, why wouldn't we have the diploma?
We have one now, see.
Well, I think the main argument, and I know I have a friend whose child's in this situation, he's a type 1 diabetic. They've decided, even before Alberta Ed, or Ed Public said they were gonna fight to not have it,
Yeah.
she said, my kid is not going anywhere to write a diploma exam. I'm keeping him home for a reason. So if that negates his whole grade 12 year, then so be it. But I'm not risking his health to send him to write a diploma exam after I've kept him home for a whole year. And so that's what you have the issue with, is those at-home parents saying, you can't now tell me my kid needs to go sit in the classroom and risk
Have the
themselves.
option of being at home.
Yeah, and so if they're exempted,
Mhm.
then how many more kids are gonna go, oh yeah, I'm doing that at work too, like, I'm out here.
And then those kids are outside standing around at skateboard park.
Not all of them, like my
Some of them
girlfriend's
are,
kid is
yeah.
not leaving the house, like
Yeah.
he is not, right? So,
So the last thing we can talk about before we're done, we have 13 minutes left, because I'm definitely gonna have you guys done at 10:30, because, hey, if you say you're gonna be done at 10:30, you better be done at 10:30. That's a promise made. So the last thing that we have on the agenda here is just a link to my Google Classroom, and I really used to hate Google Classroom, and I'm not saying I love it now, but when Dean Fiebland used to be on it all the time, I'd be like, Dean, what are you doing? Why are you using it? Because Dean's been years ahead of me in terms of this curve. And I'd probably be talking more about you guys, but you're so far away, I don't get to see you as much. And we really need to have a department that's a hub and not scattered all over the place. But Dean's been on Google Classroom for years, and you know, I'm using it more as a tool, and every day it's like, okay guys, this is what we did. So, you know
You do
what?
that every
There's-
day?
There's no excuse. There's no excuse for you to not do what we're doing every freaking day.
You
This
post
is-
that much stuff every day?
Every day, I post everything we do. And included in it would be links to the YouTube videos that I create. So if the kids aren't here,
Oh.
sometimes the camera's not where it should be.
All right, welcome back.
All right, welcome back. So I tell my kids, you know what, you can stay home and you're gonna miss none of my instruction. The only thing you'll miss is the ability to ask me for one-on-one help. But you can send in requests for that. Because there are kids that are uncomfortable being here. And once I've created these, hopefully they're a little better quality than the beginning of that. But once I've created these, the idea is that
All it said
in
was
the
one
future,
thing. All it said was one thing.
if I'm gonna be away, there it is. There's my video. So I'm gonna be away, my kids, next time I teach grade 9,
negative
here it
stuff.
is.
So when it says 21 things you didn't know about the Indian Act, it says, well,
21 things with the Indian Act. So I'm teaching the Indian Act, but what I'm really doing is teaching source analysis, right? What's up?
I'm just looking at your little thing down below there. I'm trying to see
Oh.
what they see.
Yeah, and you know what, often I don't even, because as you've seen today, like I don't stand here. So I minimize this as small as possible, but I have it there just in case I do want to at a moment talk directly to Chris and say this is why we need to go to mark diploma exams. But often it's more about what's on the computer. So you have to be careful of, you know, what screens you have open up here. Hopefully you're not shopping for Banana Republic clothes, or like, you know, I have a text message coming in from Kara. It's like, hey, have you seen Corey today? What's going on with him? It's like, so you got to be mindful of your other windows open. But yeah, great resource for the kids. I'm underwhelmed by how many of my kids use it, but at least I can say I put it out there. And I told you on the first day, everything will be on Google Classroom, and all the lessons are recorded, so now it's on you. Now, if you say, well, I don't have access to technology. Well, if you're not coming to my class and you don't have access to technology, then there's not anything more I can do. There's others that can do something for you. They can parcel it up and modulize it, but now you're talking about a different delivery of the curriculum. That's not my job now. So.
Well, that's nice, because like Tanya had asked me before with one kid, she was gonna try to help them get caught up, and I said, well, the first thing they can do is, since they haven't been here, is open up their book and listen to my online lessons, and they can follow along and fill in the things that they're supposed to fill in, just like they would have done, be in class. So now they can be in class at home, and I found that very useful because, like you said, even though nobody responds to my daily emails when they skip my class, I've done my part. I've given them every opportunity to learn, and now it's on them to do something.
Only gain power.
So here's a 42
at
less
your
for
expense. Your expense.
I don't want to talk over myself here, but and guess what? This source was one of the sources on my day one. So here it is. It's a video, and I'm seeing my daughter have to do this at home because everything she's doing right now is online from the university. The nice thing about having it online is, oh man, I need to go back. So then they can pause it, they can rewind it. In fact, I've said to Rob Cross, you know, I think that I would be doing a better job as a teacher if my kids did stay home. Because then all my kids could pause me and rewind me. Now, some of them don't, but that's a skill they need to get because the world's changed. That they do need to get the skill. And maybe 14-year-olds not, but 17-year-olds do. They need to have that skill of being able to sit and somewhat guide themselves through it by pausing, rewinding, and then when they need help, being part of those discussions, those Zooms, and asking questions or sending messages to their professors. Because that's the reality right now in college and university. And the nice thing about recording these, yeah, kids can go back, rewind it, they can watch it again, we can go through essays together, we can link some stuff, and theoretically, next quarter, when I have another 10, if I'm sick, there it is. I'm out for a week because I had COVID, the second time. Here it is. Course teaches itself. Or for my student teacher next quarter, there it is. There's a guideline. Start with this. So I'm not saying you have to do this, but I'm saying that Activepresenter really was something that both Corey and Paul had been doing in math, and sometimes it's nice to look to other departments, especially when you have a weak department head like me. I'm not that creative. Look to others. Look to Charlene for help. Look to Christine for help. They're amazing people. So talk to other people in the building. And you know, Paul and Corey told me about Activepresenter, and for my summer school course, it made all the difference. So I recorded the entire 30-1 curriculum, and now if I was sick next quarter, I could with confidence say that my students can still do well in 30-1. Aaron Salick got 100 on the diploma, on the writing. And he came in for help 3 times when we sat in the park, social distance. But at the same time, how did he develop as a writer? Through these lessons and through the Zooms that we had. So we still have Zooms, we still have, you know, it's kind of like you have tutorials, but you also have, you know, some kind of, moments for question and answer and stuff. So that's important to do. Where else was I going here?
Russ, how do you find Activepresenter versus Screencastify?
I find it, the only thing with Activepresenter is always save it before you push it to YouTube. Because sometimes when you push it to YouTube, if you haven't saved it, there might be a moment where there's a glitch and then it crashes and then you lose everything. So there's been a couple of times I forgot to save it, and then I had to record the lesson again. And then the second time recording the lesson, the first time it's like 28 minutes, the second time it's like 12, because you just speed through it. So sometimes at lunch, I'm recording the lesson in front of an empty class because I want them to have it. I'm like, oh man, we did something there, I forgot to save it. So then at lunch, I'm sitting in here talking to an empty classroom. But I find other than that, it's so smooth because you can just put it on YouTube, right? So then it's easy. Kids watch YouTube, and YouTube you can watch it anywhere. What else do I want to say? Google Docs. So with each one of my courses, I have those online textbooks. Again, I had to adapt. I used to have an online textbook, one document that had everything for 30, and it ended up getting to be about 700 pages. Kids are like, you know what? It's taking me 10 minutes to load it each time. I'm like, well, crap, right? So then I had to change. So now I have each lesson individualized. So everything for lesson 1's here, everything for lesson 2, and then here's the YouTube video, and here's our question and answer that we did. So here's our YouTube video, here's our question and answer hangout. So then if you want to go back and just say, okay, I need to review lesson 1, kids can go in there. Here's what you meant to do with lesson 1, here's our objectives, here's some sample multiple choice, here's some cartoons to fit. If I'm making a new test, maybe I borrow that cartoon. It's all here for them. So this is me responding to a criticism that Ben gave me, saying, you're not organized. I said, you know what, Ben? That hurts. But you're right. I'm not organized. You know, I'm not done teaching yet. I can't coast for 10 years and say, you know what? Screw it. I'm not going to get better organized. But by doing this, I collect stuff, and now it's where it needs to be. Rather than just having lots of great resources and forgetting how it weaves together, I weave it together, and it makes the story so much more purposeful for the kids. I'm really upset that we didn't finish semester 2 last year, because our 30-1 results were going to be our highest ever. Absolutely, we had an amazing group. I'm not saying our current group won't be amazing, but that was our banner year. We were going to get close to 85% on both parts of the diploma. We would have been top 10 in the province, but COVID. Because many of those kids had social sciences with me. Many of them had 3 levels, so I knew exactly what they had. I've been teaching them. I've been preloading stuff for 3 years. We were ready for that diploma, and then the world shut down. So that again reinforces the need to see the big picture and to work towards it, even beginning in grade 10. So, and then you always can add stuff. Like it's like, oh man, that's a great cartoon about calling these guys racist. Where can I put it? How does this fit into big picture things? So I'm just bringing up that as a last point in the sense that you guys are doing lots of good planning. And there it is. Lots of good planning. I think the next step is to create like some kind of inventory of what you're doing so that you can share that with your kids. And so that when they're working from home, COVID's eventually going to be over, but that doesn't mean we go back to the way it was. I think we're learning something more about how to teach better and how to reach more kids through COVID. And I think that things like this can be beneficial. There's stuff that my daughter can do by working at home that is better than issues in school. And I hope that the professors realize that, and when they do go back on-site learning, that some of the opportunities for collaboration and consulting are still there. Because her professors have been amazing. Really amazing. Well, except for the one that struggled a little bit. So, that's it. Long story short, if you have any more, your homework too today is if you have any more documents that you want to share about how to do these assignments, just link them in here. So just, if you have editing privileges, just go here and do a paste of a Google Doc that you have as your link. Anybody in WRPS can access, or if you really want, anybody on the internet can open. But if you want to keep it somewhat secure, either have it anybody in WRPS or invite us, and then you can have only those with the link can access it. But it is important to keep those strategies because we spent a lot of time creating those lists, and we have people in our building like Tanya that are working on these assignments with kids, and she might be like, I don't know what they expect in this first paragraph, right? So it's like, well, wouldn't it be nice to be able to bring up the document and then the kid would look at it and say, yeah, I've seen that document before. Now you have something that you can talk with them. Because the more that we can use Tanya for pulling out our kids that need that extra help on these A1, A2s, and A3s, it's better for all of us. But Tanya's here because she needs to know what we want her doing with them. Because there's a formula. And although she's been in our department before, things change. So, that's it. Any questions? So you got lots of stuff to work on today, I'm sure. I'm gonna go look around the building to see if we do have a student teacher walking around looking for
I'm
us.
sure it said October sixth.
Yeah.
Today is the sixth, is it not?
Uh,
I don't
no,
know, my phone died,
no,
or
it
nine,
said-
no,
said-
nine, it said.
Al's student teacher was walking by.
Oh.
I believe you're right, but we never received
Haven't
that
heard
email.
anything.
Because they're supposed to give us that initial, hi, here's me, I'm gonna come in, where should I park, that kind of introductory thing, and I haven't seen that. Yeah. Anywho, enjoy the rest of your day. You probably have some RTI meetings in the afternoon, and